Welcome to Luma Sleep, where stories slow the world down and help you find rest. I'm Luma, your guide tonight. Thanks for being here. Tonight, we won't ask your thoughts to be still. We'll only ask them to soften, like threads pulled gently from a spindle, loosened one at a time until nothing binds. If your body still holds the shape of the day, let it shift, not into discipline, but into rest. Let your shoulders fall, not dramatically, just enough to forget they were ever holding anything. Let your hands remember that they do not need to grasp what's already gone. There is no task now. There is no clock watching. You are here, and that is enough. Breathe in, not to perform calm, but to meet it halfway, as if the breath itself has come looking for you. Breathe out, not to empty, but to let go of what was never meant to be held overnight. Let your tongue rest against the roof of your mouth. Let your brow smooth without trying. You do not need to earn this stillness. It is already yours. And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you'll notice how the silence around you is not silent at all. It hums quietly, like the sound a thread makes when pulled gently through old cloth. A sound not everyone hears, but you do. Tonight, you do. Because something has begun to shift, not around you, within you, and the world, the one that needs nothing from you now, is ready to wait, just as you are ready to let the day unravel. Not quickly, not completely, just enough to begin again, in quiet. Now that your breath has begun to loosen its grip, let the space around you do the same. Let it become less of a room and more of a resting place, not built by walls, but by hush. Imagine the light here isn't fading, it's folding, like soft linen draped over a chair. It falls gently across your ankles, your fingertips, your quiet breath. It does not ask to be noticed. It only asks to remain. This room does not keep time. There are no ticking clocks, no glowing digits. Only the slow rhythm of something once enchanted, now exhaling softly beside you. Look toward the corners, not with your eyes, but with your awareness. They are not empty, they are held by shadows that do not hide. But listen, you are not alone here, but you are untouched. Even the silence seems to lean in closer, as if it too wants to rest its head on the pillow beside you. There may be a window nearby, but it does not matter what lies beyond it. Tonight, you are not looking out. Tonight, everything you need to know is here. Maybe there's a breeze, or maybe the air simply remembers what it feels like to move slowly. The kind of air that once wandered through castle towers, through halls where no feet stepped, but every stone remembered names. You are not in a tower now, but the room remembers how to hold stillness, like royalty, not in grandeur, in reverence. You are not lying on a bed. You are being held by a space that has chosen to stay awake so you don't have to. Let your weight settle. Let the hush deepen. Let this room become a second breath, rising and falling with you, not to lull you, not to take you anywhere, only to remind you there is nothing you need to be right now, except here and still. You don't need to listen carefully. This story isn't meant to be followed. It's meant to be felt, like moonlight across closed eyes. If your thoughts wander, let them. Let them drift like ash from a candle already blown out. The quiet does not ask for discipline. It only asks for softness, not the kind you hold, the kind that holds you. Let yourself slip lower, not into sleep just yet, but into something older. A place between hearing and dreaming, between knowing and remembering. This story lives there, not in chapters, not in arcs, but in hushes. It was never written for reading. It was woven on the edge of a spindle by hands that didn't move in a time that never passed. There is no princess in distress here, no prince, no curse, no clock, only a girl and a dream that stayed. You'll meet her soon, but not yet. First, let your breath soften more. Let the world behind your eyes turn blue. The kind of blue that doesn't belong to sky or water, but to memory. You're not being pulled under, you're being drawn inward, toward a story that doesn't rise, that doesn't end. It only unfolds, and in that unfolding, there will be something familiar, not in plot, but in feeling. The way old fabric remembers your skin, the way a name half heard still makes your breath pause. This story was waiting, not to be told, to be entered. So lie still, let the hush grow wider, not around you, in you. There is no right way to listen, only this way, soft, slow, almost gone. The dream is ready now, and you, unfolding, unwinding, breathing, are nearly ready to be dreamt. There is a place, not far, but never on the map, where breath becomes not effort, but echo. It is the place between what your eyes once saw and what they now remember, not as images, but as feelings. A place where the pulse slows, not in fear, but in permission, where the ceiling of the world draws closer and the floor becomes cloud. You may not have noticed when you passed it last, that hidden seam between wakefulness and dream. You wouldn't. It's not meant to be seen, only brushed, like the hem of a gown worn by someone who walked through a door you didn't know was there. Here, time does not move. It loops, not in repetition, but in remembrance. Here, a second can be an hour or a century, and no one minds, because nothing is being waited for, nothing is being missed. This is the place where forgotten dreams rest, where the last breath of a long sleep becomes not an end, but a song held in the throat of the world. And when that song hums very low beneath the ribs, beneath the floorboards, you know, not with thought, not with certainty, but with that soft ache that lives in the chest when something ancient has returned. And tonight, that place draws near again, not to be found, but to be felt, as if it always knew you'd be listening, and it waited in the fold between moments where neither the day nor the dream fully claimed you, where silence breathes and memory waits, and a story that never left begins to stir. Some stories end with a kiss, some with a crown, and some never end at all. They rest, not closed but paused, waiting, not to be remembered, but to be finished. There's a particular kind of weight to an unfinished story. It doesn't press, it lingers, like the last chord of a lullaby that never found its last note, like a rose that bloomed for no one. Maybe you felt it in a dream that stops mid-sentence, in a book you meant to return to but didn't, in the silence left behind when someone walked out of a room without goodbye. That's the weight I mean, and that is the weight this girl carries still, though the world has moved on, new kings, new clocks, new maps drawn without her name. She remains, not trapped, not cursed, simply unfinished, held in a hush so old even the dust has gone still in its presence. Because a story once enchanted doesn't vanish when forgotten. It waits, sometimes in a locked room, sometimes in a spindle's shadow, and sometimes in a girl's last dream. A dream that does not beg for waking, that does not demand rescue, only release, only the soft return of breath and memory and the final word no one thought to write. Until now. Time doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it turns in on itself, like thread coiled in a circle at the foot of a bed no longer slept in. Not broken, not tangled, just resting. In some places, time is not counted. It is kept, like breath held in the lungs of stone walls, like the flicker of a candle no one remembers lighting. Here, time loops, not in repetition, but in rhythm. It breathes, and where it breathes, it remembers, not dates, not years, but moments. A spindle dropped, a petal falling sideways, the soft sound of sleep becoming something more. Aurelia's story lives there, in the curve of time that never stretched ahead, only circled back on the breath she never finished exhaling. It is not a trap, it is not a prison. It is the kind of pause only magic can hold, or grief, or love that was never given a name. And so she dreams, not endlessly, but precisely. Her sleep is not a void, it is a loop of sensation, the scent of briar, the warmth of woven sheets, the memory of a lullaby no one ever sang. She has slept not through time, but inside it, cradled in a moment so carefully spun, no year could break it. But now, the air is shifting, not with urgency, but with permission, and something inside the loop, inside the hush, has begun to open. Not to end her story, only to let it unfold at last. Her name was Aurelia, once whispered by velvet tongues, now held only in the breath between two unopened windows. She lay not as a prisoner, but as something kept, like silk folded in a cedar box, never ruined, but never worn. The tower had not aged, not the way stone is meant to. The moss grew, but it never crept past the threshold. The ivy climbed, but never covered the glass. It was as if the world outside had made an agreement to wait. Inside, time folded itself at her feet, not like a servant, like a shadow. And she, Aurelia, was still, but not empty. There were thoughts now, soft, thin shapes, like birds circling before they choose a branch. They didn't press, they floated. She did not open her eyes, but she noticed the way the air no longer smelled only of linen, the way silence now carried a pulse. Something had changed, not in the world, in the dream, because this place was not her body's sleep, it was her mind's last breath, and something inside it was beginning to remember what the story had forgotten. She did not move, her body did not need to. Stillness was her language now, but within it, a question began to form. Not sharp, not loud, just the kind that hovers near the ribs when something has waited too long. She was not waking, not yet, but she was wondering. And in a dream that had spun itself for 100 years, wonder was the first thread to loosen. It didn't begin with light, not this time. It began with the absence of something, a hush where a harp once played, a space where a bird's wing used to stir the curtains. Aurelia didn't notice with her eyes, she noticed with her knowing. Something had shifted, not around her, within the dream itself. The petals on the floor, once so vivid, once glowing faintly like embers scattered on silk, were dull now. Not with dust, with memory. She breathed not audibly, but with the sensation of breath, as if her ribs remembered how it felt to rise. Somewhere beneath her sleep, a feeling curled awake. Not panic, not even curiosity, just that quiet ache of change. In the corner, a glass dome rested. It had always been there, hadn't it? Beneath it, a rose, once proud, once pulsing, now bent. Its last petal hadn't fallen, but it no longer held itself with the tension of promise. Something was ending, but not harshly, like a bow releasing its last note into the rafters. The mirror across the room no longer shimmered, no longer offered glimpses of kingdoms or kisses or kings. It had dimmed, and with it, Aurelia's dream began to do what dreams rarely do: not vanish, but exhale. She was still within it, still resting in the shape of her long sleep. But the edges had softened, as if the dream itself was preparing to say goodbye. Not with sorrow, with stillness, with grace. And somewhere, deep within that unwinding, her breath paused, not in fear, in listening. There had always been a mirror, oval, framed in rosewood, carved by hands that never left a name, set into the wall beside the bed like a quiet witness who had forgotten how to speak. It never showed her face, not once in all those dreaming years. Only images, scenes from stories that unfolded in kingdoms she would never touch. Boys grown into kings, thrones inherited, ballrooms filled with music she'd never hear. The mirror had never lied, but it had never remembered her either. Until now, Aurelia felt it before she saw it, a cooling like breath drawn inward, and then a flicker, a faint pulse on the glass, like the surface of water deciding whether or not to ripple. She turned her dreaming gaze toward it, not her eyes, but the place inside her where vision lives after sight has grown quiet. And there, not suddenly, not fully, a face began to appear. Not the mirror's visions, not someone else's story, hers. At first, a blur, a suggestion of cheekbone, of the arch of a brow not seen in a century. Then, slowly, like fog letting go of the morning, it cleared. Her face, older than the tale, softer than the myth, still. Aurelia did not flinch. She did not weep. She only watched, as if meeting a version of herself the world had forgotten to wake. The mirror did not shimmer. It did not speak. It only remembered. And in that remembering, something in Aurelia shifted. Not with noise, not with motion, just the quiet understanding that this dream, so carefully woven, was nearing its final thread. Not an ending, a release, and in the mirror her face remained. At last, it had nowhere else to go. Beyond the tower, there was a garden, or perhaps what had once believed itself to be one. No footsteps marked its soil, no shears shaped its branches, no voices lingered except for the wind's slow remembering. The roses still bloomed, not freshly, but faithfully. Their petals curled not with decay, but with reverence, as if each bloom held within its folds a memory too soft for language. They had no audience, no parade of eyes to marvel or mourn them. Only silence, only time, and yet they bloomed, not to be seen, but because they knew how. Beneath their roots, dust had gathered, not from neglect, from stillness, a stillness that held breath, and wait, and the faint echo of promises never quite spoken aloud. There was no fountain, no chime, no gardener's hand, only the slow, loyal work of beauty persisting without permission. Even the vines wove gently through stone arches, not to reclaim, but to comfort. And the blossoms, those once enchanted flowers tied to fate and time and magic, now rested, no longer bound to curses or clocks, just there, alive, even without watching eyes, even without reward. The garden had learned the same thing Aurelia now knew, that some things do not need witnesses to be real, that the quiet blooming of something true, even in sleep, is never wasted. And if petals fall now, they fall without fear, because in this hush, in this paused place, they are not falling apart, they are falling open. The castle held its breath, not in fear, but in memory. It had not crumbled, its stones remained, each resting upon the other, like palms pressed in prayer. But there were no echoes now, no footsteps crossing the tiled halls, no laughter ricocheting off marble, no silk trailing behind hurried queens. Only hush, only stillness wrapped around every corridor, like fog too loyal to leave. The chandeliers hung crooked but unfallen, each crystal speckled with dust, like stars asleep inside glass. They didn't flicker, they didn't shine, but they remembered how. Even the tapestries, those woven histories of lion-hearted love and long-gone triumph, hung with a kind of gentleness now. Their threads softened, not from time, but from waiting. In the great hall, a single chair had turned slightly askew, not dramatically, just enough to say, someone once stood, someone once meant to return. But they hadn't, and the castle, this place built to hold processions, feasts, farewells, had not been angry. It had only grown quiet. Each room became a held breath, each door a closed eye, each stare a question that had stopped being asked. There were no cobwebs, only the kind of dust that settles when something has chosen peace over purpose. And still the walls whispered, not words, but presence, the kind that clings to door frames and the back of your throat, the kind that says, someone lived here, someone paused here, someone loved, or waited too. Aurelia had not wandered these halls since the story sealed her shut. But her absence did not erase her. The castle had not forgotten. It had simply waited in the quiet rhythm of a stone, remembering skin, of rooms learning how to sleep. And now, perhaps, it begins to stir, not with noise, but with noticing, the kind that follows just before a first step returns. Names are delicate things. They live longer than the lips that speak them, curling into corners, settling between breaths, echoing in places no one ever meant to leave quiet. Aurelia's name had not been spoken aloud in many, many years. Not in love, not in warning, not even in lullaby. But that didn't mean it had gone. It had settled into the grain of wooden beams, into the silk of sheets folded and untouched, into the dust motes that danced only when the sun leaned in through the tower window. It had become a hum, the kind that lingers in your bones when someone once whispered to you just before sleep and never needed to again. It was not forgotten, it was rested. And tonight, for the first time in so long, the air shifted just enough to let the hum rise. It did not shout, it did not summon, it merely unfurled. Aurelia, a sound like thread brushing a seam, like candle wax surrendering into liquid, like breath drawn not to speak, but to listen. She did not hear it as you or I might. She felt it. A coolness across her collarbone, a warmth beneath her ribs. The familiar ache of being named without being claimed. It was not a prince's voice, not a spell's echo, not the call of fate. It was something quieter, more loyal. It was the echo of her own name rising through the spaces where silence had waited too long. Not as reminder, as recognition. And Aurelia, still wrapped in sleep, still held by the last folds of her dream, knew, not with thought, but with breath. She was being remembered, not by the world, by the story itself. And it was whispering her name not to wake her, but to welcome her back into herself. It sat where it always had, tucked into the shadows at the far end of the tower, neither hidden nor displayed, just waiting, not gleaming, not spinning, not dangerous now, just still. The spindle, horn smooth at the tip, wood darkened by years that never passed in the ordinary way. Time had pooled around it, not swept through it. No thread hung from it now, no pull, no coil, only memory. It had been the center of the story once, the hinge on which everything turned. But tonight, it is quiet, like an apology never spoken aloud, like a wound long since healed, but still tender when touched. Aurelia did not reach for it. She didn't need to. Her breath remembered its rhythm. Her fingers, still resting in sleep, curled slightly as if echoing the moment they had once pricked themselves into legend. The spindle didn't ask forgiveness, and she didn't offer it. They simply coexisted, a girl and an object, both softened by the weight of an ending that never quite arrived. The room around it did not tense. The air did not shift. There was no magic left to guard. Only presence, only the shared stillness of two things woven into the same story by accident, by design, or by the soft hand of something older than fate. And still, the spindle stood, not cursed, not crowned, just there, like a thread that never broke, only loosened, like a breath that never stopped, just waited. And in that waiting, a kind of peace bloomed between them, not because the past was rewritten, but because it had been seen and let go. Not everyone left the castle, not everyone fled when the hush began to thicken, when the vines wrapped tighter, when the story slipped from whisper to sleep. There was one, not remembered by name, not drawn in the tapestries, who stayed. She was not a queen, not a servant, not a sorceress, just someone who loved Aurelia the way only quiet people do, with presence, not possession. Perhaps a nursemaid whose hands had once swaddled a too small infant while snow fell soft beyond the shutters. Perhaps a sister not born by blood, but by the kind of closeness that doesn't need naming. She stayed, long after the fires dimmed, long after the bells stopped ringing, long after the garden ceased to bloom for anyone but the sky. She didn't fight the sleep, she folded herself into it, not under its spell, but beside it. Every night, she sat at the foot of the tower stairs, not speaking, not expecting, just breathing, so that the castle knew someone still did. Her breath became the rhythm that time forgot, the thread that the spindle couldn't cut. And when she too grew still, it wasn't loss, it was offering, a breath passed on, not ended, a quiet vow woven into the stone and the ivy and the silence that would one day soften into change. Aurelia never knew her, not with memory, not with sight, but tonight, beneath the hush of the dream, she feels it. The warmth of another breath carried forward, wrapped around her like a shawl that had waited 100 years to fall across her shoulders. It says nothing, it asks for nothing, it just is. And in that isness, Aurelia understands. Not all who wait do so for endings. Some wait so the story never becomes alone. Rooms remember things we no longer say. The way a hand lingers on a windowsill, how fabric folds itself into the corners of a chair, how silence settles exactly where someone once stood. Aurelia's room had no clocks, no music, no scent of firewood or fresh air. But it knew her. It had learned her rhythm, not by watching, but by holding. The creak of the floorboard beneath the left side of the bed, the slant of light she used to follow with half-lidded eyes just before slipping beneath sleep. Even the linens, washed long ago in herbs, now forgotten, had softened with her weight and waited without complaint. The room had not grown colder, it had grown stiller, not abandoned, aligned. Every stone, every timber, every worn thread of tapestry bore the shape of her stillness, like a bell holds the memory of its last chime. Tonight, as her dream thins like lace held to the light, the room responds, not dramatically, not all at once, but with a subtle shift in breath, a sigh in the floorboards, a ripple in the curtain, a hush behind the walls that feels less like emptiness and more like listening. The bed, too, responds, not with creak or collapse, but with softness, as if it remembers the weight of her as a girl who once dreamed of lilacs and a woman who forgot she was sleeping. She is still lying there, but the room no longer holds her as something dormant. It holds her as something returning, and not just to wakefulness, to self. This was never a prison, never a coffin of velvet and myth. It was a room built to keep a pulse alive long after the world forgot how to feel it. And tonight, it feels her again, and she, without moving, feels it too. There was no sound, no clang of breaking spells, no trumpet of awakening, just a feeling, small, steady, rising inside her. It wasn't her heart, not in the way hearts are meant to beat. It was deeper, wider, like a sky opening beneath her ribs. For the first time in 100 years, there was space inside her. Not emptiness, not hunger, just space. As if something once wrapped too tightly had finally loosened its fingers. She did not breathe harder, but her breath felt different, not held, not suspended, but chosen. The kind of breath taken when no one is watching. The kind taken when you return to yourself without needing permission. She didn't know what had changed. She didn't need to. It was not thought that guided her now. It was rhythm. The rhythm of lace collapsing in water. The rhythm of light shifting across a ceiling that no longer dreams of ceilings. The dream was thinning, not ending, but becoming transparent. And within it, Aurelia moved. Not her body, not yet, but her presence, her center. The dream had held her like glass holds firelight, carefully, reverently, without touch. But now the light was moving. It was hers, and it was returning to its source. Her chest rose slightly, the barest lift, a ripple in the sky that lived within her. She did not know where she was going. She didn't need to. Because this sensation was not direction. It was readiness. And above her, around her, through her, the dream began to breathe. It began not with wind, but with suggestion. The air changed, not cooler, not warmer, but aware. And then the curtain stirred, just slightly, not billowed, not blown. They moved the way memories do when they're almost recalled, just enough to remind you they were never truly gone. The fabric had long since forgotten the outside world, its light, its change, its seasons. And yet, tonight, it responded, not to weather, to presence. Something had shifted in the hush, a current like breath exhaled through forgotten stone. The dream around her, once sealed like amber, had begun to melt. A candle, still standing, let go of a single thread of wax. A shadow on the far wall slipped an inch downward, as though released from an old agreement. Everything was moving, but nothing hurried. This was not a return, not yet. It was a loosening, the way water loosens cloth, not to damage it, but to soften its seams. The spindle's dust unsettled just slightly, not as a warning, as an exhale. Even the tapestry above the hearth shifted its folds, once stiff, now breathing. Aurelia remained still, but inside her, 1,000 threads pulled slightly tighter, not in fear, but recognition. This was not the end of the dream, but it was the part dreams rarely reach. When they begin to let go of themselves, not to vanish, to become something new. And tonight, the curtains moved, not because the world was coming in, but because the dream was finally ready to go out. It had never been hidden. The door, just quiet, built of wood pale with time, its edges softened like a page turned too many times by a hand that never pressed hard. It did not glimmer, it did not creak, it did not beckon. But tonight, Aurelia noticed it, not because it had changed, but because she had. It had always been there, nestled into the curve of the tower wall, like a thought too gentle to finish. Not locked, not shut, just not seen. She did not rise, her limbs remained still, but her dreaming gaze rested on it now, not with longing, not with fear, with familiarity, like recognizing something you didn't know you'd always known. The door held no spell, no emblem, no secret, just presence. The grain of its wood held the shape of countless seasons that had passed outside its reach. The hinges bore no rust, only patience, and beneath the frame a faint line of dust had broken, as if the air itself had brushed it aside to make room. She didn't need to open it, not yet. It was enough to see it, to know it had never left, that there was always a way forward, a threshold, a release. She had not been trapped, she had been held, and now, with the softest shift of breath, she saw the invitation that had waited beneath her sleep. It did not glow, it did not speak, it simply stood there, ready, and she, wrapped still in the last folds of her final dream, was beginning to step toward it, not with footsteps, with awareness, because some doors don't need to open to change everything. They only need to be remembered. She remembered it, but not clearly, not like a moment, more like a scent half caught on a passing breeze. The kiss, the one Story swore came like thunder after silence, like light cracking through enchantment. But in Aurelia's memory, there was no thunder, no shattering, only stillness, and maybe no kiss at all. Maybe it was a breath, not from another's lips, but from her own. A breath drawn not to speak, not to cry, but to begin again. She had heard once, perhaps in a dream within the dream, that some awakenings come not from love, but from readiness. And if there had been a kiss, it had not belonged to someone else. It had belonged to the version of her that had always been waiting, not behind glass, not beneath spell, but within. A part of her that had curled inward like a petal in winter, not because it was frozen, because it was patient. And now, as the air began to move through the folds of her sleep, she did not stir, but she remembered, not a face, not a hand, only a warmth, brief, near her mouth. Not desire, not rescue, just presence, like lips brushing the surface of a story, not to wake it, but to thank it. And perhaps, if there had been a prince, or a figure cloaked in legend, they had come and gone like the scent of jasmine on a forgotten shawl. But the dream had stayed, because it was never the kiss that kept her. It was the stillness that followed, and that stillness, soft, faithful, ever patient, was what she now breathed in as the memory passed like a cloud across the surface of herself. Not to end anything, just to remind her that waking does not always begin with movement. Sometimes it begins with remembering you are already here. The dream had been a place, but also a posture, a way of being still without falling apart. It had held her, not tightly, but completely, like water holds a reflection without ever asking for weight. And now, as it began to loosen its hold, she did not reach for it. She released it, not all at once, not like someone waking from a fevered sleep, but like silk slipping through fingers, like fog parting because the sun did not ask it to stay. There was no sadness, only softness, the kind of softness that comes from being ready long before you knew you were. The dream had done its work. It had carried her, not away from the world, but toward the place in herself where nothing needed to be proven. Not beauty, not strength, not love, just being. And now that place had grown wide enough to walk through. So the dream began to fall away, not in pieces, in petals, each one a memory of something not quite lived, but fully felt. The sound of leaves turning in the wind, the weight of a crown never placed, the shape of a question never asked aloud. All of it drifted now, slow and light, toward a hush that would hold them without asking them to stay. Aurelia did not rise, but she turned inward, toward a self no longer cradled by spell, or story, or silence. She had not escaped. She had not conquered. she had simply ended. And in that ending, found that the dream was never a cage. It had been a room with an open door, and she, having never knocked, had finally walked through. The air moved differently now, not in gusts, not in drafts, just a gentle expansion, as though the tower itself had drawn a breath for the first time in 100 years. Not a gasp, not a cry, just the quiet inhale of something that had never been lifeless, only paused. The stone beneath the window no longer felt cool from enchantment. It felt cool because morning was somewhere beyond it. A bird, not seen, not heard, fluttered across the edge of the dream. Its shadow brushed the windowsill like a hand checking for warmth. And then, stillness again, but not the same stillness as before. This stillness was filled with return. The vines that clung to the tower's outer wall seemed to lean slightly back, not receding, but releasing. Not as guardians, as companions. And the walls, long unmarked by footsteps, began to remember what it felt like to echo again, but softly, like a bell rung only once for memory's sake. Aurelia remained within the folds of her bed, the dream still unwrapping itself from her shoulders like a shawl no longer needed. She did not open her eyes, not yet, but something inside her, something old and quiet and deeply known, had already awakened. The tower did not shine, it did not break its silence with fanfare or flame. It simply breathed, and in that breath was an invitation, not to begin a new story, but to walk gently into the still warm space where the old one had just ended. It did not vanish, it did not crumble, it did not glow. The spindle remained, but something had changed. It no longer carried tension, no longer held the silence of an unfinished tale. It was just wood now, just form, just object. And still, it mattered, not because it was cursed, but because it had been part of something whole. The light that touched it now was not wary, not reverent. It was ordinary, morning light, soft, unconcerned. Aurelia would never touch it again, not out of fear, because she didn't need to. There was no thread to follow, no fate to rewind, only rest. The kind of rest that comes after release, after return, after the final stitch has held firm. It stood quietly in its corner, the way all endings do, without a crown, without applause. And the room around it no longer turned toward it. It turned inward, toward breath, toward light, toward the warmth left behind by dreams no longer needed. Aurelia did not look at it. She didn't need to. But if she had, she might have seen it for what it truly was. Not the thing that broke the story, the thing that gave it shape. And now, with no spell to hold, no sleep to spin, the spindle, at last could rest too. It took its time, not out of hesitation, but out of grace. The final petal, that soft, curled edge of something once blooming, now ready to be still. It had clung gently through seasons that never changed, through sunrises that never arrived. Not because it was stubborn, because it understood rhythm, the rhythm of staying, the rhythm of release. And tonight, or perhaps finally this morning, it let go. No wind pressed it, no hand plucked it. It simply fell, one slow spiral through air that had been holding its breath for centuries. It did not tumble, it descended. Like a curtain's last sway after the final note of music, like the hush after someone you love says nothing at all, and it is enough. Aurelia didn't see it fall. She didn't need to, because something inside her shifted at the same moment. Something deep and quiet and waiting. The kind of shift that doesn't wake you, it frees you. The petal touched the stone floor with no sound, but the air changed just slightly, like a whisper leaning back into silence. It was not the end of a spell. It was not the proof of a prophecy. It was a gesture from the dream to the dreamer. Thank you, it seemed to say. Thank you for staying, and now you may go. The window had no glass, only space, only the kind of openness that happens when nothing needs guarding anymore. Light came in, not sharply, but fully, the way warmth does when no one is waiting for it. It touched her fingertips, her cheekbone, the corner of the bed where time had once curled itself into stillness. Aurelia did not open her eyes. She didn't need to, because something within her was already awake. Not the kind of waking that rushes, that climbs, that returns. This was quieter, like sitting beside someone who says nothing and means everything. The dream had ended, but it had left behind its shape, its hush, its breath, its gentleness. And in that gentleness, light settled, not just in the room, in her. Not blazing, not breaking, just staying. The way light stays on an old photograph, the way it stays in the folds of a letter you never send but cannot throw away. She did not rise, she did not speak, but she knew that whatever spell had held her, whatever silence had kept her, whatever story the world had forgotten to finish, she had lived it and let it go, and what remained was not loss, not sleep, not legend, only presence. And the light, soft, steadfast, still, stayed with her.